Hello, I'm Steve, also known as Tea Break Knitter on social media. In this tutorial, I want to tell you how I use the ideas of symmetry to help me spot when I make mistakes in my knitting early, so that I can go back and repair them there and then, rather than waiting until I've got a lot further on in the knitting. Although I'll be using colour work to explain my ideas, they apply equally to textured knitting. We're using different types of stitch, to cables, and also to open work, often known as lace knitting or knitted lace. So I'll show you how I use symmetry. I'd like to start by talking about different types of symmetry. We've got translation symmetry and reflection symmetry. These are particularly helpful to knitters. There are also other symmetries called rotation and scaling that I won't talk about in this tutorial, but designers might be particularly interested in those. In terms of translation symmetry, this is where your shape is repeated either horizontally or vertically. In this case, you can see a triangle is repeated as you go across a line. You might see minor variations, in this case they're the colour, but basically we're interested in the things that are in common. In a written knitting pattern, a translation symmetry could show up as a repetition in a row, knit 2, repeat, purl 2, knit 2 3 more times, or repeat rows 3 to 5 10 more times. That would be a vertical repeat. So this is a repeat within a round or row, and this is a repetition of a group of rows. So if you're doing one of these repetitions, you can compare your current repetition with earlier ones to see that they're the same. If they're not the same, you can work out where you made your mistake before it has been covered up by more complicated patterns coming on later. Looking at that another way, you might have your knitting represented in a chart, and for a chart you would often have a motif that's then repeated as you go along a row or you go up a row, just like this one. And what's not necessarily obvious from the motif itself is what the overall pattern looks like, where you'll often see other symmetries appearing that you weren't obviously aware of. So here we've got the 1, 2, 3 horizontal repeats and the 1, 2, 3 vertical repeats. And as the original motif is repeated, you can see that it's forming an overall systematic design, which is of a set of crosses on a background, or if you prefer, a set of diagonal lines with those crosses in between them. And so you can use this as you're knitting to be able to compare what's happening in this repeat with what's happening in that repeat. The other type of symmetry is reflection, so as things would appear in a mirror. So what happens as we move from left to right is the opposite of what happens as we move from right to left. This can be useful in knitting when you've got something like an armhole or a v-neck. So coming back to our pattern, you can see this vertical symmetry here. If we come up column 10, we look to its right. On the top row, you've got a white, black, 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 and on the left, you've got a white, black, black, black. So what's happening on one side of the line of symmetry is the opposite, is happening in the opposite order to what's happening on the other side. So translating that into knitting, and we've got, say, we're here, and we have got a v-neck that we're doing in the middle of the front of a jumper. So look what's happened if you have a V-neck. The V is normally placed along a line of symmetry in your design so that the left-hand side of the garment looks like the right-hand side of the garment and everything is nice and symmetrical, it's balanced left and right. So as you do your decreases, what you actually see here, starting off the bottom, is what's happening on the right-hand side as you look at it as you're knitting. Things happening in the opposite sequence to on the left, and the same as you go up through all of these. So as you knit across your armhole, across your V-neck, once you get to the far side, you can check that you've got the same sequence, black, white, white, as you move away from the V. You can also use this as a way of working out where you should start knitting again after your pattern. So as you go up the chart, you're working your way across, and often this will be inset from the edge of the motif as it's shown in your pattern. So when you pick up the other side of the V-neck, you can just say, where am I in the pattern? I've got to be looking for where it goes white, white, black, 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 and you can look for that sequence on the other side just to check that you're picking up and knitting your chart from the right place. As for armholes, often you'll find the armholes are symmetrical. You've got the same pattern as you leave the armhole on what to you as you knit is the right hand side of what you're looking as you have on the opposite side. So again, you can check that at the beginning of the part of the garment you're knitting, you've got the same sequence in reverse as you have on the opposite side. That doesn't always work though. This is offset slightly. It isn't symmetrical. So take this line, you've got one black there and two blacks there. However, you will often find that the front and the back of the garment are the same. So if you're looking at the front as you knit it, and you've got the sequence two blacks and a white on this round, then as you're knitting the back, as you come away from the armhole, you'd also expect to see two blacks and a white, and the same on the other armhole. So that's another way in which you can do the checking. Even if an individual part of the garment isn't symmetrical, you'll often see a symmetry with a different part of the garment that you can check as you're knitting. Now I've been talking about this in terms of colours, colour work. It applies equally if you're using stitch patterns such as knits and purls, and for lace work and other open work where things can get a bit more complicated. And certainly as you knit one repeat of your pattern, you can check that with the next repeat immediately you finish that second repeat to make sure you've got the same sequence of stitches. At that stage it's easier to go back and correct what you've done. Once you've done a few more stitches and even gone on to the next row of your knitting, it becomes far more difficult to correct your open work. So let's have a look at what that means in practice. Here's an example of where we can use translation to find a mistake in our knitting. In this swatch we've got a front which has a V-neck opening and armholes which you can see on the front and on the back. And what we have here, if you look in the vertical, we've got this pattern repeating there and there, is that that cross has got a white centre and that cross has got a brown centre. So there's a mistake. This repeat is not the same as that repeat, and it's that centre is wrong. Things get a bit more complicated as we try and find the mistakes on the front here. So just to help you orientate yourself, here is the front of the knitting, and I have highlighted the edges of the steeks with those that blue thread, and you can see here you've got the V-neck and you've got the two steeks on either side. So with that to help us, what can we see now? Well, first of all, if we look at what's happening here and what's happening here, in this sequence we got quite clearly there are two white stitches as we come away from the edge, and in here we appear to have a brown and a white. And if you compare what's happening, this is where I've used a knit two together, which is sloping towards the interior of the fabric instead of an SSK, which would have been sloping away, and if it had been sloping away, then the white stitch would have been dominant, not the brown stitch. We've got a difference here. As we're coming in, we've got two clear white stitches here, and we've got two stitches being joined together here. I forgot to decrease on this side. On this down here, another sequence that, if you look, is incorrect. In this one, I've used a slip knit, which is a right leaning stitch instead of a left leaning stitch. So you're getting a different appearance down on this bottom part here. So again, looking on the back and the front of these armholes now, you see here we've got two stitches in white and one white below them and a brown above that. Here we've got the two stitches, the one stitch and a white above it. That should be the same because we've got the armhole here. We're starting the pattern away from the armhole. It should be the same. It's not. So here we've got the mistake, and that brown should be a white. On the left here we've got part of a cross up against the steek. Here we've got a full cross against the steek. There must be a mistake there, and in this particular mistake was I forgot to decrease. So again, we're using the translational symmetry of comparing the front and the back. So by understanding that you can use the various repeats in your pattern to see where things should be the same, and so you can compare them, and understanding how the shaping of your pattern is symmetrical, either side of a line of center line in a symmetrical pattern, or between front and back when you're knitting your piece, you can see where there are differences where there should be no difference at all, and you can go back and correct those problems before they get buried under the next few rows. So that's how I use symmetry to help me spot mistakes in my knitting. I hope you found this useful. Until the next time, happy knitting.